Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. I should like to talk to you about the pink dragon effect, or more broadly, the Illuminati, the Rothschild, the Bilderbergers, and the evil, selfish corporations. There's an effect that I call the pink dragon effect, and I'll explain why I call it that a little further on. But the parties I've just named are basically the parties that conspiracy theorists blame for everything. Even if their candy bar is melted when they get home from the store, it's obviously got something to do with evil corporations or the Rothschilds or Bilderbergers. They explain everything in the modern world, from our presidential elections to wars to famine to the increasing economic poverty in Africa, to the rise and fall of governments. All of it is explained by conspiracy. An evil, selfish person behind the scenes manipulating something for their own ends, trying to get something from everybody else at their own for their own benefit at everybody else's cost. That's at the base of every single problem in the modern world. Somebody's doing it. And if we could only rebel against the selfish, evil corporations or Rothschilds or whoever, if we could just rebel, we'd be fine. We just have to keep people from suppressing us. That's the whole idea. Well, let's take a look at human psychology for a second. Thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, in prehistoric times, they had to explain thunderstorms, sickness and illness, death, sleep, dreams, conflict, war, whatever, birth. Oh man, I mean, can you name the things they had to explain? They couldn't explain why a guy yelling across the valley, you see him, and he puts his hands down, and a minute later his voice gets there. They had no freaking clue. They had no explanation for these things. So, the only form of cause-effect they knew was what? Willpower. Their own willpower. They didn't know anything about the idea that in nature, one event happening causes another. They automatically project a consciousness onto it. They couldn't conceive of one event causing another event with nobody involved. They can't conceive of it. Somebody has to be involved. There has to be a willpower there. For example, a stream running downhill to the ocean, or a tree falling over in a storm, or a storm coming and lightning and stuff. No matter what it is, they project a consciousness to be causing it, because they can't fathom any other form of cause and effect. It's anthropomorphization of nature, putting human qualities into nature. You know, on those cartoons or whatever where bears walk around and talk, that's anthropomorphization on the animals of, human qualities onto the animals. We're putting human qualities onto nature when we say Zeus is responsible for the lightning bolts and so forth. When actually it's just cause and effect. It's just reality. And it may be hard to understand, and we might have to think really hard to do it and be disciplined and rational, but you can't explain the thunderbolts with gods. Now, how do we explain modern problems? Is an interesting fact that clear back for decades and decades, even in the 20th century, any explanation of our problems came in the idea people are too selfish. Ayn Rand quoted a poll in one of her speeches, and it was a public opinion poll taken on the streets of New York or some city, Chicago, about Richard Nixon. And they were asking, what should we do for this part of the economy, what should we do for that part of the economy, and why is Nixon good or bad or whatever. And they said, people said over and over again, the most ridiculous platitude. We shouldn't be selfish. Everyone's got to sacrifice. If people weren't so selfish, we wouldn't be in these problems we're in today. That's the only explanation they can come up with. Again and again and again and again and again, someone's being selfish. There's problems in the world, someone's being selfish. We gotta stop this selfishness and start sacrificing for others. Then we'll be okay. Now that's just one aspect of it. That's the aspect everybody in society partakes of. Everyone thinks someone's being too selfish. If there's a problem, selfishness is the problem. But there's a group of people today that are crazier than that. They believe it's not just selfish people somewhere, like, my neighbors and everyone in general is a little too selfish and therefore prices are too high or whatever. Rather than that, they believe there's a cabal of really nasty, dirty, evil, selfish people controlling the whole frickin' world. Everybody on the planet is subject to these people. And they've managed to hide their entire conspiracy from everybody except a few nutcases who have found out somehow. How do we explain World War I and World War II? Was that Germany starting a war and then a bunch of countries attacking them? Or was that evil, selfish corporations trying to get a war started so they can make money selling tanks? And how about the existence of Soviet Russia? Who created Soviet Russia? Which corporation? Which selfish individual? Which Illuminati or Rothschild's branch created Soviet Russia? Or was that just a fact of history? Some things are a fact of history and other things are a conspiracy? Or maybe you do believe someone did create Soviet Russia as a way to milk money out of the Americans. Probably the American arms industry did it, didn't they? I'll bet they sent people over there. They probably raised Lenin from diapers. GMC or Ford Motor Company or whoever. Well, wait a minute, let's see, cars didn't exist then. Well, some evil, selfish corporation certainly has to be behind the rise of Russia. Just like evil, selfish corporations are behind the war in Iraq and 9/11 and everything else. Now, think about the people in Soviet Russia in the 1940s, 50s, 60s. The people in America today come up with crazy explanations for stuff, conspiracy theories and so forth. Can you imagine what the people in Russia were coming up with to explain stuff? They had their government lying to them 24/7. They knew they couldn't pick up a newspaper without having to read between the lines. Their whole country was a lie. Their whole society was full of hypocrisy and irrationality and hatred and self-loathing. And how did they explain it? They must have thought that the government was in with the Americans. They must have thought America owned Russia and was just keeping them down. Or that Russia owned America and it was all just a hoax. Who knows what they came up with. But at the end of the day, guess what Russia was? Russia was a dictatorship started by people who believed they were doing the right thing. And it ended because it didn't work. Now that's it. That's a simple, simple story. Dictatorship. People who thought they were doing good, it didn't work, it collapsed. That's it. There's no conspiracy, there's nobody behind it, there's no selfish person making profits off of it. And the same thing holds true for our modern problems. In a really strong sense, in really identical way to Russia. It is not selfish corporations, businesses, the Rothschilds, Bilderbergers, bankers, Jews, or corporations that are doing the bad things. It's Ralph Nader. That's who we have to stop. And that's the funny irony of it. There are people running around thinking they're doing good. And they're actually the ones damaging society. Like Ralph Nader, who brings government intervention into the economy every single chance he gets. And on the other hand, there's people who don't want anything from society except what society will willingly give them in trade. Like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, who come up with wonderful inventions, creations, progress that we then purchase from them gladly and willingly. And then they make money off of it. So isn't that odd that we would somehow try to blame the people who are doing good